What if the deepest knowledge you could ever seek came with an unimaginable price? What if the only way to understand the secrets of the universe was through the most profound sacrifice? This is the core of the ancient tale of Odin, the Allfather of the Norse pantheon, whose unyielding thirst for wisdom would lead him to one of the most excruciating trials any god has ever endured. His journey begins not with power or strength, but with a single, all-consuming question. What is the true cost of knowledge? Imagine for a moment that you have reached the pinnacle of your existence. As the ruler of Asgard, you hold dominion over gods, mortals, and realms alike. You command the forces of nature, the winds, the skies, and the seas. Yet, amid all this grandeur, there is one thing you lack, something that no amount of power can bestow. It is wisdom, the kind of wisdom that transcends even the gods, the ability to understand the very fabric of existence itself, to peer into the mysteries that bind life, death, and the endless flow of time, to see beyond the veil of the known world and grasp the truths that govern the cosmos. For Odin, this hunger for wisdom was not just a desire, it was an obsession. The gods of Asgard, despite their immortality and unmatched strength, were limited by their knowledge of the world. The Aesir had their own ways of navigating the realms, their own powers, but the mysteries of the universe, the forces that govern fate, and the secrets of life itself remained elusive to them. Even Odin, revered for his immense power, was not immune to the yearning for deeper understanding. Odin had seen many gods fall and many battles fought, yet in every triumph, there lingered a haunting question. What lies beyond the reach of the gods? What is the true purpose of our existence? And how can we understand the threads of fate that bind us? It was a question that, in time, began to consume him. Every victory, every conquest, and every moment of glory felt incomplete because, in the deepest corners of his mind, Odin knew there was something more, a hidden truth waiting to be discovered. The gods were immortal, yes, but immortality alone was not enough to fill the void that Odin felt. Power could not answer the fundamental questions of life. Strength, though mighty, could not lead him to understanding. The gods could rule, but they did not truly know. And so, as Odin gazed out over Asgard, surrounded by his kin and his might, he felt a deep, gnawing emptiness. It was not a void that could be filled with gold or warriors. It was a thirst that only knowledge could quench, and it was a thirst that would not let him rest. In his search for answers, Odin turned to the oldest and most revered source of knowledge in the 9 realms, Yggdrasil, the world tree. The tree was the axis of all existence, stretching across the realms, its roots entwining with the very core of reality. It was said that the tree held the secrets of life and death, of time and space, and everything in between. If there was a way to gain the wisdom he so desperately sought, it would surely lie within its branches. But the path to Yggdrasil was not one that could be traversed lightly. The tree was not a mere symbol of nature. It was an embodiment of the forces that governed all of existence. To seek its wisdom was to challenge the very fabric of the universe. Odin knew that gaining the knowledge he sought would not be a simple task. It would require more than just strength or wit. It would demand a sacrifice, something of immense value, something irreplaceable. As Odin contemplated the depths of his desire, he began to understand that this pursuit would demand more than he had ever given. He would have to sacrifice not just his power, but perhaps something more integral to his very being. For the Allfather, the cost of knowledge was not a price that could be measured in gold or favor. It would have to be something far more personal, something that would test his very essence. The very idea of sacrifice haunted Odin. It wasn't that he feared loss. After all, as the ruler of Asgard, he had seen countless battles and had lost many dear companions. He had already experienced the pain of loss, of watching friends and family fade away in the wake of time. But this was different. The price of wisdom was not something he could predict, not something that could be bargained for or calculated. It was a sacrifice of the soul, a giving up of something so integral that once it was gone, there could be no turning back. Yet, the more Odin reflected on this, the clearer it became. The only way to achieve the wisdom he sought was to surrender part of himself. Perhaps it would be his immortality, his invulnerability, or even his strength. Whatever the cost, Odin knew that in order to gain the knowledge of the cosmos, he would have to give up something that no god had ever truly been willing to lose. But this was the nature of wisdom. The deeper the insight, the steeper the price. In his search for counsel, Odin turned to the Norns, the three sisters who wove the threads of fate. They were the keepers of destiny, the ones who knew the paths that each soul would take, from birth to death and beyond. The Norns were ancient beings, older than even the gods, and their understanding of the universe was beyond mortal comprehension. Odin approached them, seeking their guidance, hoping they could help him understand what his sacrifice would mean. The Norns, as always, were cryptic in their response. They spoke of time, of fate, and of the great sacrifices that were often required for those who sought true wisdom. Their words were not direct, but they hinted at the weight of the journey that lay ahead. They did not tell Odin what to do. Instead, they simply reminded him that knowledge came with a cost. The decision, ultimately, was his to make. It was a choice between power and understanding, between the known and the unknown, between the gods and something far greater than even the Aesir could comprehend. As Odin stood before the Norns, listening to their words, he felt a deep sense of unease. He understood that the path he was about to walk would change him forever. It would take him to the very edge of his existence, pushing him to the limits of endurance. But despite the fear and doubt that gnawed at him, Odin knew there was no turning back. The thirst for knowledge could not be quenched with mere power or possessions. It required something more, something that would transform him in ways he could not yet understand. It was in this moment of quiet reflection that Odin made his decision. He would offer himself as a sacrifice to the very tree that had long stood as a symbol of all that was unknown. He would hang from the branches of Yggdrasil, giving up his life, his very essence, in the hope of gaining the wisdom he so desperately sought. But Odin also knew that he would not simply die. His sacrifice would not be a conventional death. It would be a test, a trial that would push him to the brink of his existence, to the very edge of the abyss. The pain would be unbearable, the isolation profound, and the journey fraught with uncertainty. But for Odin, the price of wisdom was one he was willing to pay. And so, he prepared himself for the unimaginable. His resolve hardened, and the weight of his decision settled over him like a mantle. Odin knew that, in order to understand the deepest truths of the universe, he would have to lose a part himself, something irreplaceable. He would hang from the branches of Yggdrasil, suspended between life and death, in a sacrifice that would echo through the realms of gods and men alike. For in the pursuit of wisdom, there is no other way. This version enhances the emotional depth of Odin's inner conflict and emphasizes the gravity of his sacrifice, while maintaining the calm, contemplative tone suitable for a storytelling format intended for relaxation and sleep. Odin was not like the other gods of Asgard. He stood apart from the others, not just in stature or power, but in his pursuit of something greater than dominion or glory. As the Allfather, Odin held sway over the 9 realms. But despite his immense power, there was something about him that could never be fully understood. He was driven by a hunger that went beyond the mortal world, beyond even the realm of gods. His quest was not for wealth or victory, but for something more elusive, more intangible wisdom. The kind of wisdom that lies beyond the veil of what the gods know, the wisdom that shapes fate itself. And so, while the gods of Asgard lived in a world of order, power, and triumph, Odin's mind was always elsewhere, seeking, wondering, yearning for something that could not be seen with mortal eyes. In the golden halls of Asgard, Odin reigned supreme. He was the god of war, the god of the skies, the ruler of the Aesir, and the one who could command the winds and the storms. His wisdom was revered, his leadership unquestioned. But even as the ruler of such a magnificent kingdom, Odin felt the weight of something he could not escape. He had conquered realms, waged wars, and led his people to victories that would be sung about for ages. Yet, deep within him, there was a feeling, a quiet, persistent voice that he could not silence. It whispered to him that all his power, all his knowledge, was limited. In Odin's eyes, the gods of Asgard, despite their immortality, were not infallible. They had strength, but they lacked something essential. Their knowledge was finite. The laws of the universe, the mysteries of existence, were beyond their understanding. The gods knew the world around them. They could command elements, shape fate to some degree, and wield power over the 9 realms, but they did not know the cosmos in the way Odin felt they should. They were like children playing in a garden, unaware of the vast world beyond. Odin had seen this for ages. Their petty quarrels, their shallow pursuits, their blindness to greater truths that lay hidden from their eyes. And so, Odin's thoughts were ever restless. He walked the halls of Asgard, a god among gods, but his mind was far away. He was haunted by the knowledge that even his immense intellect and power could not answer questions that plagued him. He wondered about the nature of the universe. What was the true origin of the gods? What lay beyond the stars? How did the threads of fate intertwine? And why was life and death so intricately bound? These questions gnawed at him, and he could not ignore them, no matter how hard he tried. To the other gods, Odin was a figure of unshakable authority. He was wise, cunning, and powerful, qualities that earned him the respect of all. But beneath that exterior, beneath the armor of the Allfather, was a god torn between what he had and what he longed for. Odin had tasted power. He had seen the vastness of the 9 realms, and he had felt the weight of leadership, yet none of it brought him peace. It only deepened his thirst for something more. There had to be more. There had to be something beyond the control he wielded, something that even he, the mightiest of gods, could not comprehend. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights, when Odin's thoughts turned to the mysteries of the universe, that he heard of the Well of Wisdom. This well was said to be a source of knowledge, a place where the deepest secrets of the cosmos could be found. The well lay hidden in the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, which is the very axis of all existence. Yggdrasil was a central tree that held together the 9 realms, its roots and branches reaching into the very heart of time and space. And within these roots, deep beneath the surface, lay the well, a place where all the knowledge of the universe was said to be contained. It was a legend whispered among the gods, a story that seemed almost too incredible to be true. And yet, for Odin, it felt like the one true path toward the answers he so desperately sought. The Well of Wisdom was not a place where anyone could simply walk up and drink from its waters. No, the well was guarded by forces older than the gods themselves. It was protected by the spirit of the world tree, an entity whose power was beyond the comprehension of even the Aesir. To reach the well, one would have to travel far, journeying into the very heart of the tree itself. And even if one could reach it, the cost of drinking from the well was said to be immense. Those who sought its waters would have to pay a price that could not be measured in gold or wealth. No, this price would be something far greater, something that would test the very core of a god's being. But it was precisely this challenge that drew Odin's attention. For all his power and wisdom, Odin had always known that true wisdom, real, transformative knowledge, came at a cost. The greatest truths of the universe, he believed, could only be unlocked through great sacrifice. And so, despite the dangers, despite the risks, Odin knew that he had to seek out the Well of Wisdom. It was the only way to answer the questions that haunted him. It was the only way to gain the understanding he had craved for so long. Yet, Odin also understood that the journey would not be easy. It would require more than just strength or cunning. To gain the wisdom he sought, he would have to confront the deepest parts of himself, to wrestle with the very nature of his existence. It was a daunting thought, one that filled even the mighty Allfather with a sense of unease. But it was also a challenge he could not ignore. The fire of curiosity burned too brightly within him. His need to understand, to uncover the truth, was too strong to deny. In his quiet moments, Odin found himself standing at the edge of the Bifrost, looking out over Asgard and the realms beyond. He could see the mountains and valleys of Midgard, the swirling mists of Jotunheim, the golden halls of Alfheim. He could feel the pulse of the 9 realms beneath his feet, each world vibrant with life and history. And yet, despite all of it, he still felt the emptiness inside, the emptiness that only wisdom could fill. He longed to know how everything was connected, to understand the forces that shaped the very fabric of existence. Odin knew that the gods of Asgard were content in their ignorance. They had their place, their power, and their immortality, and for them, that was enough. But Odin could never accept that. To him, knowledge was the ultimate prize, the key to understanding not just the world, but the very nature of existence. The wisdom he sought was not a luxury. It was a necessity. It was the only way to fulfill his true purpose as the Allfather, to lead the gods and protect the realms. Odin needed to understand the deeper forces at work in the universe, forces that went beyond mere power, beyond the realms of the gods themselves. And so the decision was made. Odin would seek out the Well of Wisdom, no matter the cost. He would journey to Yggdrasil, face the trials that lay ahead, and offer whatever sacrifice was necessary to drink from the well. For Odin, the price was worth it. The pursuit of knowledge, the search for understanding, was a path he could not resist. The answers he sought were too important. The cost of wisdom, as high as it might be, was a price he was willing to pay. And so, with the weight of this decision settling in his heart, Odin set his mind toward the great task ahead. The journey would be long, and the sacrifices would be great. But the Allfather, with all his might and determination, was ready to pay the price for the wisdom he so desperately sought. The path to the Well of Wisdom had been set, and nothing would deter Odin from his quest. Not even the gods themselves. The mysteries of the universe awaited, and Odin was prepared to uncover them, no matter the cost. Odin's desire for wisdom was more than a passing ambition. It was an intrinsic part of his very being. Even as he sat upon his throne in Asgard, the mighty Allfather was consumed by profound knowledge that, despite his immense power, he knew little of the greater truths that governed existence. The gods of Asgard were powerful, yes, but even they were bound by the limits of their own understanding. To possess true wisdom, knowledge not just of the realms they governed, but of the very forces of nature, fate, and life itself, that was the true prize. And so, while his people looked to him for guidance, while his warriors stood ready for battle at his command, Odin's mind was elsewhere, fixated on the greater unknowns that surrounded him. The gods of Asgard lived their lives in what seemed like eternal prosperity. They had their feasts, their victories, and their eternal youth. Their halls were grand, their realms vast, and their power unquestioned. Yet, for all their glory, the gods seemed to exist in a world of limitations. They were immortal, yes, but that immortality only gave them time to grow bored of their own existence. They were not immune to struggle, but their struggles were often petty, trivial affairs. Even their most glorious battles, their most celebrated victories, seemed hollow when measured against the vastness of existence. Odin, the Allfather, had seen it all: the rise and fall of heroes, the endless cycles of conflict between gods and giants, the weaving of the fates that shaped their lives. Yet, amid all of this, something was missing, something deeper. Odin had long recognized that the gods were bound by their own perceptions of the world. They had their rituals, their sacred laws, and their own sense of order. They understood the forces of nature, the winds, the storms, the harvest, but they did not understand the forces that lay beyond these earthly things. They did not know the truths that govern the cosmos, the underlying patterns that held the 9 realms together. They were gods, yes, but they were still limited by the world they had created and the world that surrounded them. Their knowledge, though vast compared to that of mortals, was but a fraction of the whole, and that knowledge, Odin realized, could not take them beyond the realm of what they already knew. Odin's thoughts often turned to the greater mysteries of life, the origins of the gods themselves, the creation of the realms, the forces that shape the fate of all things. But beyond these lofty questions lay something more profound. What lies beyond the knowledge of the gods? This was a question that consumed Odin's heart, the question that, despite all his might, he could not answer. To the gods, life seemed like a well-ordered machine. Fate was decided, the realms were governed, and everything had its place. But to Odin, this was not enough. There had to be more. There had to be a deeper purpose behind the forces that govern the cosmos. It was during one of these long, sleepless nights that Odin's thoughts took a darker turn. He began to realize that while the gods were immortal, their immortality was but an illusion. It was a gift, yes, but it was also a curse. The gods lived forever, but they could not truly live. Their time was endless. But without the ability to change, to evolve, to grow in wisdom, they would be forever trapped in an eternal cycle of repetition. Their strength might endure, but their understanding remained stagnant. Asgard itself, for all its beauty and grandeur, was a gilded cage. The gods lived without purpose beyond their endless cycle of power and control. But Odin was different. He was not content with this stagnant existence. He had tasted power, but it was not enough. He had commanded armies, led the gods into battle, and ensured the prosperity of his people, yet he still felt empty. He longed for something beyond mere dominance, something that would fulfill the deeper longing in his soul. Power could not answer his questions. It could not satisfy the hunger within him. And so he turned to something else, the pursuit of wisdom. Wisdom, for Odin, was not just knowledge. It was understanding. It was the ability to see beyond the surface, to grasp the very threads that wove the fabric of existence together. But Odin understood something crucial. True wisdom came with price. Knowledge, once gained, would transform the very being of the one who possessed it. It would bring a change that could never be undone. And this transformation was not something Odin could take lightly. For in gaining the wisdom of the universe, he would be forced to face the limitations of his own existence. Wisdom would reveal not just the truth about the world, but also the truth about himself. The parts of him that were flawed, the parts of him that were human, even if he was a god. Odin's first step toward wisdom came when he sought the counsel of the Norns, the three sisters who wove the fates of gods and men. The Norns were the keepers of destiny, the weavers of time, and they held knowledge that even Odin could not comprehend. Their powers were ancient, older than the gods themselves, and they understood the forces that shaped the destinies of all things. Odin, always one to seek knowledge, approached the Norns, hoping that they would give him the answers he sought. He believed that they might show him the path to understanding, might help him grasp the greater truths of the universe. But the Norns were not like other beings in Asgard. They were not easily swayed, and their wisdom was not freely given. When Odin came before them, the Norns greeted him with silence. They did not speak of his past victories or his status as the Allfather. They simply looked at him, their eyes filled with the weight of eternity. And then they spoke. But their words were cryptic, woven in riddles that only deepened the mystery surrounding the universe. They did not give Odin the answers he sought. Instead, they spoke of the cycle of time, of fate, and of the price of knowledge. They told him that the path to true wisdom was not one that could be walked lightly. It would come with great sacrifice. To truly understand the universe, to grasp the forces that shaped existence, he would have to give up something precious, something that would change him forever. This was not the answer Odin had expected. He had come to Norn seeking a simple way to unlock the mysteries of the cosmos, to obtain the knowledge that would set him apart from the other gods. But instead, he was faced with a truth far more complex. Wisdom, the Norns told him, could not be obtained through mere intellect or study. It could not be gained by force or willpower. To truly understand the secrets of the universe, one must be willing to sacrifice something dear, something that defined them. Wisdom, in its truest form, was a transformation. It required a giving up of self, a willingness to face the deepest parts of one's soul, and to let go of that which held them back. For Odin, this was both a terrifying and exhilarating revelation. He had always been willing to sacrifice for the greater good, to risk everything for the sake of his people. But this was different. The wisdom he sought would not come through battle or conquest. It would come through suffering, through a deep and personal loss. And this was a key that had eluded him for so long. The realization that to truly know the world, to understand the forces that govern all things, he would have to surrender a part himself. The very act of gaining wisdom would change him. It would shape him in ways he could not yet comprehend. The price was high, but for Odin, it was a price he was willing to pay. But the Norns did not tell Odin what exactly he would have to sacrifice. They merely spoke of the price, of the need for transformation, and left the rest for him to discover. Odin left their presence, his mind filled with a mixture of apprehension and determination. He knew now that wisdom would not come easily. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But it was a journey he could not resist. His thirst for understanding, his desire to see beyond the veil of the gods, was too strong. Odin's mind now turned toward the one place where the answers he sought might be found. Yggdrasil, the world tree. It was the axis of all existence, the tree that connected the realms, the tree that held the knowledge of the universe in its roots. The well of wisdom, hidden deep within Yggdrasil, was the source of all knowledge. But to reach it, Odin knew, would require him to confront his own limitations. He would have to face the very core of his being and let go of everything he thought he knew. And in doing so, he would transform, not just as a god, but as something more, something new, something wiser. The great tree that stood at the center of the 9 realms was called Yggdrasil, a name spoken with reverence by all who understood its significance. It was not just a tree, it was the very axis of existence. Its roots delved deep into the unseen depths of the cosmos. Its branches reached into every realm, touching the farthest reaches of creation. Yggdrasil was a thread that tied everything together, the foundation upon which the realms rested. Its immense power and ancient nature made it a symbol of life, death, and everything in between. To the gods, it was sacred. To Odin, it was a gateway to the knowledge he sought, the key to understanding the very nature of existence itself. For ages, Odin had been drawn to Yggdrasil, captivated by the mysteries it held. He had seen the great tree stretch out across the 9 realms, its branches swaying gently in the winds that blew between worlds. He had heard tales of its roots that connected the realms of gods and mortals, and the great well of wisdom hidden deep within its roots, a source of knowledge older than time itself. But to reach the well, one would have to venture into the heart of the tree, and that was no simple task. The journey was not for the faint of heart, nor was it a journey that would be taken lightly. To seek the wisdom of Yggdrasil was to embark on a path that would challenge everything one believed in, forcing the seeker to confront the very nature of their existence. Odin knew that his pursuit of wisdom would lead him to Yggdrasil. He had already made the decision. The price of wisdom was one he was willing to pay, no matter what it cost him. But even as he prepared for the journey, a sense of trepidation settled over him. The great tree was not a place to be entered lightly. Its roots were deep, its branches vast, and the forces that dwelled within it were beyond the understanding of any mortal or god. Even Odin, with all his power and knowledge, could not fully comprehend what lay within the heart of Yggdrasil. But that uncertainty was part of the allure. It was what drove him to seek the well in the first place, the promise of something greater, something beyond his grasp. For all his strength, wisdom, and leadership, Odin knew that he had not yet touched the true depths of existence. The well of Yggdrasil promised to grant him that knowledge, and yet the price for it remained a mystery, a challenge that Odin had to face. To reach the well, Odin would have traversed the 9 realms, passing through treacherous landscapes and facing challenges that tested both his mind and body. The journey would take him beyond familiar walls of Asgard and into realms filled with danger and uncertainty. The road was fraught with obstacles, each one designed to challenge him in ways he had never known. But Odin was not one to shy away from such challenges. He had faced countless foes in his time as Allfather, had led his people to victory in countless battles, and had endured trials that would have broken lesser gods. This journey, however, would test him in ways no battle ever had. The first of the realms he would need to cross was Midgard, the realm of men. Though Odin had watched over Midgard for eons, he had never truly walked among its people. The mortals were insignificant in the grand scheme of things, their lives fleeting compared to the immortality of the gods. And yet, they had their own form of wisdom, one born from struggle, survival, and the passage of time. It was here that Odin would begin his journey, where he would walk in a world of men and seek the answers he so desperately needed. In Midgard, Odin observed the lives of mortals, watching as they worked, loved, and fought. Their lives were fleeting, their days short, and yet they possessed a wisdom that Odin had never fully understood. Their knowledge was not born from power or divine insight, but from experience. The mortals faced death every day, and in doing so, they gained a kind of wisdom that no god could ever know. As Odin walked among them, he realized that the wisdom of the gods was not enough. It was incomplete. It lacked the depth that came from living in the face of mortality, from seeing the world through the eyes of those who had no time to waste. The gods lived forever, but they lacked the urgency that came with knowing that time was limited. Odin's journey through Midgard was a humbling one. He saw the pain and joy of mortal existence in a way he had never before. It was a world where every moment mattered, where every action had weight. And as he watched, he began to understand something crucial. That true wisdom was not just about understanding the workings of the cosmos, but about understanding the fleeting nature of life itself. It was about living with awareness, knowing that every decision had consequences, and that every moment was precious. The journey took Odin deeper into the realms, past the lush forests of Alfheim, through the rocky, barren landscapes of Jotunheim, and into the icy wastelands of Niflheim. Each realm presented its own unique challenges, each one more daunting than the last. The gods of these realms were not like those of Asgard. They were beings of raw power, untamed and wild, and they were not always inclined to help Odin on his quest. But Odin pressed on, undeterred by the dangers that lay before him. He had already made the decision to sacrifice whatever was necessary to gain the knowledge he sought. There was no turning back. As Odin journeyed further into the realms, he began to see the world in a new light. Each realm held its own secrets, its own truths, and as he traversed these lands, he gained insights that he had never imagined. He learned from the giants of Jotunheim, whose raw strength was matched only by their wisdom of the natural world. He learned from the light elves of Alfheim, whose ethereal beauty was matched by their profound understanding of the forces that shaped the universe. And he learned from the Norns, who wove the very threads of fate and destiny, showing him how every life was connected, how every action rippled through time. Through it all, Odin's connection to Yggdrasil grew stronger. The great tree was not just a physical entity. It was a force that flowed through every realm, binding them together in ways that could not be seen but only felt. The more Odin learned, the more he understood that Yggdrasil was not just a tree. It was a living, breathing entity that held the knowledge of all existence. It was a symbol of life, of death, and of everything in between. And it was through the tree that Odin would find the wisdom he sought. But first, he would have to face the final trial. At last, Odin stood before the roots of Yggdrasil. The tree loomed before him, its great trunk stretching toward the sky, its branches a canopy that seemed to touch every corner of existence. The roots, twisted and gnarled, burrowed deep into the earth, reaching into the unseen depths of the cosmos. It was here, at the very heart of Yggdrasil, that the Well of Wisdom lay. The well was said to be a source of unimaginable knowledge, a place where the deepest truths of the universe could be found. But to drink from its waters would require a sacrifice that Odin was now ready to make. As he approached the well, the air seemed to shift. There was a weight to the space around him, a stillness that spoke of the ancient power that resided within the tree. The well's waters were clear and still, yet they shimmered with an inner light, as if the very fabric of reality itself was contained within them. Odin knew that this was it. This was the moment he had prepared for, the moment that would define him, change him, and transform him into something greater than he had ever been. But even as he stood before the well, Odin could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had come so far, and yet the final step remained. The price of wisdom was always steep. And now, standing at the well's edge, he realized that this was no ordinary sacrifice. To drink from the well would mean to lose something that could never be regained. Wisdom, once gained, would change him forever. It would strip away the parts of him that were tied to the mortal world and transform him into something else entirely. The cost of knowledge was not just a matter of pain. It was a matter of losing part of himself. And yet, as Odin stood there, he knew that this was the only way. To gain the wisdom he sought, he would have to surrender. He would have to let go of everything he had ever known. The journey was far from over. But it was here at the well that his transformation would begin. In that moment, as Odin gazed into the waters of the Well of Wisdom, he understood that the true price of knowledge was not something that could be measured in terms of loss or gain. It was not about what he would give up, but about what he would become. The journey had already changed him, and it was through the sacrifice that lay before him that he would truly come to understand the nature of the universe. The wisdom he sought was not just about knowing the world. It was about becoming one with it. And it was this final step, this final act of surrender, that would lead him to the knowledge he had always sought. The waters of the Well of Wisdom shimmered before Odin like an endless ocean, dark yet illuminated by a subtle, internal light that seemed to pulse with life. It was as if the well itself contained the heartbeat of the universe, a rhythm so ancient that it could never be fully understood. Every ripple in its waters seemed to carry with it the knowledge of past and future, of creation and destruction, of life and death. This was the moment Odin had been preparing for, the final trial in his quest for the deepest truths of existence. His mind, sharpened by years of contemplation, was now filled with questions, the same questions that had haunted him for eons. What would it cost him to drink from a well? What would he lose in pursuit of this wisdom that seemed so far beyond the reach of any mortal or god? The well was guarded by the forces of Yggdrasil itself, the very essence of the tree. It was said that only those who were truly worthy, those who had demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice everything, could drink from its waters and unlock the mysteries hidden within. Odin had already faced the challenges of the Nine Realms, traversing worlds filled with danger and intrigue. He had learned from mortals, giants, elves, and the very Norns who wove fate itself. Yet despite all this, he now stood before the well with the weight of a final decision pressing heavily upon him. For this was not a choice between two outcomes. It was a single, irreversible act. Once he drank from the well of wisdom, his fate would be sealed. There could be no turning back. What would he gain? What would he lose? And what would become of him once he had tasted the truth? The very air around him seemed to thrum with energy as Odin took a step closer to the well. The roots of Yggdrasil, ancient and vast, stretched deep beneath him, touching the foundations of existence itself. They twisted and wriggled like serpents, interwoven with the fabric of time and space. And there, nestled among them, lay the source of all wisdom, the well that held the deepest secrets of the universe. Its waters were still, but Odin knew better than to believe that stillness was a sign of simplicity. The very nature of the well was one of profound depth, where time and knowledge bled together, and where the very essence of existence could be understood in an instant or over the course of eternity. It was here that Odin felt the full weight of what he had come to do. The wisdom of the well was not just knowledge of the physical world or the gods' domain. It was something far more abstract, more intangible. It was a knowledge of the flow of time, the unseen forces that guided all things, the fate of the gods, and the mortality of all life. To drink from this well was to step beyond the boundaries of what a god could know. It was to glimpse the vast web of creation, to understand the hidden strings that tied the gods to the mortals, to feel the weight of destiny, and see the past, present, and future unfold before one's eyes. But it was also to understand the fragility of existence, the inevitable decay of all things, and the ultimate destruction that awaited even the gods. Odin hesitated for just a moment, his heart heavy with the enormity of the decision. He had long understood that wisdom came with price, but standing before the well, the true cost seemed more real, more palpable than ever before. What would it mean to know everything? What would it feel like to possess knowledge that transcended time and space? Would he still be the Allfather, the leader of the Aesir, the god of wisdom and war? Or would this act change him forever, taking him to places of understanding that no god was meant to travel? The pull of the well was undeniable. It whispered to him in a voice as old as the universe, calling him to drink, to understand, to become one with the vast expanse of existence. The knowledge contained within its waters promised to answer all the questions he had carried for so long. How had the realms come to be? What was the true nature of fate? What lay beyond the veil of life and death? These were questions that gnawed at Odin's soul, questions that he could not ignore. The pursuit of wisdom had been his greatest desire, and now, standing at the edge of the well, he knew that this was his final test. But Odin was no fool. He understood that wisdom came with a price far greater than he had ever imagined. The gods, despite their immortality, were not invincible. They were bound by the laws of the universe, and even they could not escape the inevitable end that awaited all things. The wisdom he sought would not only unlock the mysteries of the cosmos, it would reveal the inevitable decay of all things, even the gods themselves. This knowledge would change him. It would strip away the illusions of power and invulnerability that had defined his existence. To drink from the well would be to face the ultimate truth, that all things, no matter how mighty, must one day fall. Odin stepped closer to the well, his heart steady, though his mind was filled with uncertainty. He had always understood the importance of sacrifice. He had given much in his pursuit of wisdom, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The price of knowledge was not something that could be measured in simple terms. It was not about losing power or prestige. It was about confronting the very essence of existence, the impermanence of life, and the inevitability of death. The wisdom he sought would not only reveal the secrets of the universe, it would show him his own limitations, his own mortality. And so, as Odin knelt before the well of wisdom, he felt a deep, almost primal understanding wash over him. To drink from the well was not to gain power, but to lose it. It was not about knowledge for the sake of control, but knowledge for the sake of truth. He would no longer be the omnipotent Allfather. He would no longer be the ruler of gods and men. Instead, he would become a part of the vast, intricate web of existence. He would see himself as a part of the greater whole, no longer separate from the forces that govern life and death. The well's waters were clear, reflecting the light of Yggdrasil's branches that stretched out across the realms. But they were also deep, swirling with unseen currents, their depths impossible to comprehend. As Odin gazed into the waters, he saw the faces of those who had come before him, his ancestors, the first gods who had walked the realms. He saw the great battles that had shaped the fates of the gods, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the ebb and flow of time itself. He saw the future, too, glimpsing the events that would shape the fate of the gods and all that existed. But more than that, he saw the inevitable end, the destruction that awaited even the gods, the Ragnarok that had been foretold, the final battle that would mark the end of the old order. The wisdom of the well was not easy to bear. It was not comforting or soothing. It was not a simple collection of facts or insights. It was a revelation, a deep and profound understanding that could not be easily grasped or explained. As Odin drank from the well, he felt his mind expanding, his consciousness stretching beyond the boundaries of his own being. He felt time itself unravel before him, and the threads of fate intertwined with his own. He felt the way of the future, the inevitable decay that awaited all things, and the understanding that nothing, not even the gods, could escape the cycle of creation and destruction. The price was steep, but Odin knew there was no other way. He had come to this moment, this final trial, to unlock the deepest truths of existence. And now that he had tasted the waters of the well, he understood. Wisdom was not about power or control. It was about understanding the transience of all things, the ebb and flow of life, the eternal struggle between order and chaos, the fragile nature of existence. To truly know the world, Odin realized, was to accept that nothing lasted forever. Not the gods, not the realms, not even the knowledge that he now possessed. But in that acceptance, there was also a form of liberation. The pursuit of wisdom had led him to this point. And now, standing at the well's edge, he knew that he had unlocked the final piece of the puzzle. He was no longer just the Allfather. He was now a part of the greater whole. The knowledge he had gained would shape his future, but would also shape the future of all who came after him. The wisdom of the well had not just answered his questions. It had changed him. And in this change, Odin realized lay the true power, not in knowing all, but in understanding that no one, not even the gods, could ever truly know everything. All things were bound by fate, and to understand that was to understand everything. As Odin stood up, his gaze lingering on the well, he knew that his journey was far from over. The knowledge he had gained would guide him, but it would also weigh heavily on him. He had seen the future, and it was not one that would be easy to bear. But the wisdom he had sought, the wisdom that had driven him to this point, had been worth the sacrifice. He was no longer just a god of war, of power, and of strength. He was now a god of understanding, of acceptance, and of the eternal cycles that governed all existence. The journey had transformed him, and with that transformation, he knew that he had become something greater than he had ever been before. The transformation that took place within Odin as he drank from the well of wisdom was unlike anything he had ever experienced. His mind, once sharp and focused, was now expanded beyond the limits of even his understanding. The answers he sought, the knowledge he'd yearned for, flowed through him like an endless stream. But it wasn't the kind of knowledge that came easily. It was an awareness, a deep knowing that permeated every fiber of his being. The answers were not neatly packaged, nor were they simple truths that could be easily grasped. They were complex, interwoven with time and fate, and had the weight of eternity behind them. To truly understand them required a complete reshaping of his perspective on the universe. The first thing Odin noticed was a profound silence that filled him, the constant hum of the 9 realms, the chatter of gods, mortals, and even the creatures of the realms, all seemed to fade into a quiet stillness. It was as if the very fabric of existence had slowed down, allowing him to see it from a new vantage point. It was no longer just the world as he knew it. Time and space were no longer the linear, confined entities they had once been. The past, present, and future were all suddenly laid out before him, like a vast, intricate web that stretched out in every direction, connected by threads of fate and free will. Odin saw the lives of mortals, the gods, and even the very beings who inhabited the spaces between realms. He saw their struggles, their desires, their triumphs, and their inevitable demise. Each life, no matter how brief, was part of a larger design, a design that was not written in stone but constantly shifting, shaped by the choices made by individuals and the cosmic forces that bound them together. The balance between order and chaos, between creation and destruction, was more delicate than he had ever realized. It was not just the gods who shaped fate. It was all living things, and even in their smallest actions, they could influence the course of events that stretched out across the 9 realms. But with this vast understanding came the harsh realization that no one, not even the gods, were immune to the forces of time. The very concept of immortality that the gods held so dearly was a fallacy. Though they might live for millennia, they were bound by the same rules that governed all life. Death was inevitable for all things, even those who thought themselves eternal. The gods, for all their power and wisdom, were not exempt from this universal truth. The cycles of creation, preservation, and destruction were woven into the very fabric of existence, and even the gods would one day fall. Odin's mind stretched beyond the immediate concerns of Asgard and the 9 realms. He began to see the interconnectedness of all things, the delicate balance that held the worlds together. The gods, the mortals, the creatures, the realms themselves. Everything was part of a larger, intricate dance, and the choices of one being could ripple across time and space, altering the course of events in ways that were impossible to predict. No one could see the full picture, not even the gods. The wisdom he had sought was not about control or power, but about understanding the forces that shaped existence and accepting the limitations of his own perception. As Odin gazed upon the vastness of the universe, he realized that the knowledge he had gained had not only opened his mind, it had also shown him his own place within the cosmic order. He had once seen himself as a leader of the gods, as the Allfather who commanded the realms and wielded power over the forces of fate. But now, with the wisdom of the well flowing through him, he saw himself as part of something much larger, a part of a living, breathing universe that was constantly evolving, shifting, and changing. He was not above it. He was within it, connected to it in ways that he had never understood before. This awareness was both humbling and terrifying. The idea that everything, even the gods, was subject to the natural laws of existence was a truth that Odin had never fully accepted. For all his power, he had always believed that the gods were exempt from the cycles of life and death, that they were the masters of fate. But now he knew that the gods, too, were caught in the web of destiny, their actions shaped by the very forces they sought to control. And the most humbling realization of all was that no matter how much wisdom he gained, no matter how much he understood, there was still so much beyond his grasp. The universe was too vast, too complicated, to be fully comprehended by any single being, even one as mighty as Odin. As the realization settled within him, Odin felt a deep sense of loss. He had sacrificed so much on his quest for wisdom, but now he understood that there were no final answers, no simple truths that could provide him with the certainty he had longed for. The pursuit of wisdom was not a path that led to ultimate power or control. It was a journey without end, a journey that required constant adaptation and acceptance. The answers he had sought had not provided him with the kind of certainty he had hoped for. Instead, they had shown him the fluid nature of existence, the way that all things were in constant flux, shaped by countless forces that were beyond anyone's control. Yet, despite the sorrow that accompanied this realization, there was also a sense of peace. Odin had always believed that knowledge was the ultimate weapon, the key to mastering the universe. But now he understood that wisdom was not about mastering the world around him. It was about understanding the limitations of his own power, the fragility of life, and the inevitability of change. Wisdom was about learning to live with the unknown, to accept that there would always be things beyond his understanding. It was about knowing that even the gods must bow to the forces that govern the universe. The weight of the knowledge Odin had gained was immense. It was as if the very essence of the cosmos had been poured into him, reshaping his understanding of everything he had known. He now saw his own role in the greater web of existence. He was no longer the omnipotent ruler of Asgard, the god who stood above all others. He was a part of the flow of time, a part of the natural order, and his actions, no matter how powerful, were subject to the same forces that govern all things. But this realization did not diminish his resolve. Odin's journey had not been for nothing. Though the wisdom he had gained was far more complex and elusive than he had ever imagined, it had given him a deeper understanding of his place in the world. He now knew that his actions, both as a god and as a ruler, had consequences that rippled out across the 9 realms. His choices mattered, and they could shape the future in ways that were not always predictable. But above all, he knew that he had to accept his limitations, to embrace the uncertainty of existence, and to live in harmony with the natural cycles of the universe. Odin's heart grew heavy as he reflected on what he had learned. The knowledge of the Well of Wisdom had not brought him the kind of peace he had expected. Instead, it had opened his eyes to the harsh reality of existence, that all things, no matter how mighty or eternal, were bound by the same forces of nature. The gods were not above death, and neither was Odin. The 9 realms, for all their beauty and grandeur, were fleeting. Time was the greatest force of all, and no one, not even the gods, could escape its grasp. But in this acceptance, there was also strength. Odin understood now that the pursuit of wisdom was not about avoiding the inevitable. It was about embracing the truth of existence, no matter how difficult it might be. The wisdom he had gained had shown him the interconnectedness of all things, the delicate balance that held the universe together. It was a balance between life and death, creation and destruction, order and chaos. And it was in this balance that the true power of existence lay. As Odin left the well, the knowledge of the universe still pulsing through him, he knew that it had been changed forever. The weight of wisdom was a heavy burden, but it was also a gift. It was a gift that allowed him to see the world as it truly was, without the illusions of power and control that had once defined his existence. And though the journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, Odin knew that he was no longer the same god who had first sought the well. He had become something greater, something wiser, more attuned to the rhythms of the universe. And in this new understanding, he would find the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The weight of wisdom that Odin carried after drinking from the Well of Wisdom did not fade with time. In fact, it grew heavier as the days passed, settling deep into the very marrow of his bones. What he had learned, what had been revealed to him, was not something that could be easily dismissed or ignored. It was a living presence inside him, a constant reminder of the profound truths he had uncovered about the universe and about his own place within it. As the Allfather, Odin had always believed that power and control over the realms were the defining qualities of a god. But now, with the wisdom of the well coursing through his veins, he saw things differently. The knowledge he had gained had stripped away the illusions that had surrounded him for so long. It was no longer about dominance, not about ruling the 9 realms with an iron hand or expanding his own influence. It was about understanding the true nature of existence, the delicate web that connected all things, and the forces that shaped the fates of gods and men alike. Wisdom was not about controlling the flow of time or bending the universe to his will. It was about seeing the flow of life, of fate, and accepting the role he played in that vast, intricate design. At first, this understanding was difficult to bear. Odin, who had spent countless eons at the center of Asgard, pulling the strings of fate and orchestrating the lives of the gods, was now faced with a profound realization. He was no longer in control. The knowledge he had gained revealed that all beings, gods and mortals alike, were part of a greater scheme, one that was not dictated by the will of any single entity. The Norns, the Fates, wove the threads of life and death with their own hands, and even the gods were bound by those threads. What had once seemed like a grand design, a world ruled by the gods' wills, now appeared to be a fragile, ever-shifting tapestry. Odin had long believed that he was the master of destiny, that his actions and decisions shaped the course of the world. He had been a god who sought knowledge, who sacrificed for power, who fought battles not just for his people, but for the very future of the realms. But now, in the face of this newfound wisdom, he understood that even his most powerful actions were part of a larger plan, one that no one could fully comprehend. The world was not his to command. It was a living, breathing entity, one that could not be controlled or manipulated without consequence. The realization was sobering. It brought with it a sense of humility that Odin had never known before. For all his strength and wisdom, for all his sacrifice and ambition, he was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, and his actions had ripple effects that extended far beyond his immediate reach. The gods, it seemed, were not exempt from the natural laws that govern existence. They, too, were caught in the great flow of time, bound by fate, just as the mortals were. No matter how much power they wielded, no matter how much knowledge they gained, they were still subject to the whims of the universe. Even the Allfather himself was a mere player in a grand cosmic drama, the outcome of which was never fully within his control. Odin felt a deep sense of loss as he came to terms with this new understanding. For so long, he had been the one who shaped the future, the one who made decisions that would ripple through the realms and change the course of history. But now, he understood that his role was much smaller than he had ever imagined. It was not about making the world bend to his will. It was about learning to live in harmony with it, to accept his place within the greater design of existence. The knowledge of the well had shattered the illusion of omnipotence that it held for so long, and in its place was a profound understanding of the limitations that even gods must face. But despite the grief that came with this realization, there was also a sense of clarity. Odin had long struggled with the weight of his responsibilities. As a ruler of Asgard, as a protector of the realms, he had carried a burden of countless decisions, each one fraught with consequences that could alter the course of fate. He had been tasked with ensuring the survival of the gods, with overseeing the destiny of entire worlds. But in this new understanding, he saw that his role was not one of dominance or power. It was one of stewardship, of guidance. The wisdom he had gained showed him that it was not his job to control fate, but to work within it, to help guide the realms along their paths and to ensure that the balance of life and death was maintained. This shift in perspective was liberating. For the first time in his long existence, Odin felt a sense of peace. He no longer had to be the one who controlled everything. He no longer had to bear the weight of the entire cosmos on his shoulders. He could step back and allow the natural flow of the universe to unfold as it would, knowing that his role was simply to guide and protect, not to dominate or manipulate. This acceptance of his place in the grand scheme of things brought with it a sense of humility that allowed him to see the world in a new light. But even as Odin embraced this new understanding, he also realized that the knowledge he had gained came with a heavy responsibility. The more he saw, the more he understood about the workings of the universe, the more he felt the weight of the decisions he had made in the past and the decisions he would make in the future. He could no longer view the realms and the gods as separate entities. They were all connected, bound together by the threads of fate. And each decision he made, no matter how small, had the potential to change the course of events in ways that were impossible to foresee. Odin understood that wisdom was not about predicting the future, but about understanding the forces that shaped it. It was about seeing the interconnectedness of all things, the way that every action, every choice, no matter how seemingly insignificant, could have far-reaching consequences. The gods were not above fate, nor were they exempt from the natural cycles of life and death. They were part of the same cosmic order that governed all things, and in this knowledge, Odin found a deep sense of purpose. He was not meant to control the world. He was meant to serve it, to protect it, and to ensure that the balance of the realms was maintained. The wisdom Odin had gained also revealed to him the complexities of his own existence. For all his power, for all his wisdom, he was still a being of flesh and blood, bound by the same forces that governed the mortals he had once seen as inferior. The gods, in their immortality, had always believed themselves to be above the frailties of mortal life. But now, Odin saw that immortality was not a blessing. It was a burden. It was a gift that came with its own set of limitations, its own set of challenges. The gods were not free from the cycles of time. They were bound by them, just as the mortals were. And this understanding forced Odin to confront his own mortality, to acknowledge that even he would one day fade, that even the gods would eventually fall. In this acceptance of his own mortality, Odin found a deeper sense of peace. He could no longer see himself as above the realms, as someone who existed outside the natural order. He was part of it, a piece in a greater puzzle. And in this humility, he found his true strength. The wisdom he had sought had not given him the power to control the universe. It had given him the power to accept his place in it, to understand that true wisdom was not about dominating the forces of nature, but about living in harmony with them. The knowledge Odin had gained also deepened his understanding of the cycles of creation and destruction. The realms were in constant flux, constantly shifting between order and chaos. And in this shifting there was beauty. The gods and mortals, the creatures of the realms, All had their part to play in this eternal dance. There was no beginning and no end, only the continuous flow of time, the ever-changing cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The gods might live forever, but they, too, were part of the cycle. Their immortality was not an escape from death, but part of the ongoing rhythm of the universe. This knowledge gave Odin a sense of peace, but also brought with it a deep sadness. The wisdom he had gained had shown him that nothing, not even the gods, were immune to the ravages of time. The cycles of life would continue, whether the gods were ready for them or not. And in this realization, Odin found a sense of purpose. He was not just a god of war and wisdom. He was a protector of the realms, a guardian of the balance between life and death. His role was not to control the future, but to ensure that the cycle continued, that the balance was maintained, and that the realms would continue to thrive, no matter the challenges they faced. The wisdom Odin had gained was not the kind of power that could be wielded like a sword. It was the kind of power that came from understanding the world, accepting its limitations, and working within the forces that shaped it. The knowledge he had sought had not been about power. It had been about understanding. And in this understanding, Odin found a new purpose, a new sense of meaning in his existence. It was no longer about domination, no longer about bending the universe to his will. It was about finding his place within it, and in doing so, ensuring that the balance of the realms was preserved. The wisdom he had gained had not only changed him, it had transformed the way he saw the world and the way he saw his own role in the grand design of existence. The realization that no god was truly in control of the universe, not even Odin himself, was a difficult truth to come to terms with. It had shattered the image he had long held of himself as the supreme ruler of the 9 realms, the all-knowing Allfather who steered the course of time and fate. The wisdom he had sought at the Well of Wisdom had revealed to him not only the interconnectedness of all things, but also the limitations of his own power. This knowledge, though profound, weighed heavily on his heart. It was as though the weight of the world, or perhaps the weight of the entire cosmos, had been laid upon him, and he was now forced to see the universe not as a structure to be commanded, but as a living, breathing entity that moved and changed without his intervention. The threads of fate, so intricately woven by the Norns, had become clearer to Odin than ever before. He could now see the vast tapestry of existence stretching out before him, a web of connections between gods, mortals, and all the creatures of the realms. The threads were delicate and constantly shifting, and no god, no matter how powerful, could truly alter their course. The Norns, the keepers of fate, guided the threads, weaving the destinies of all beings, but even they were not immune to the forces that shaped the universe. Odin understood that the gods were as much a part of the weave as the mortals, that their actions were part of a greater cosmic order that no one could truly control. This realization brought a deep sense of humility to Odin, for he had spent so much of his existence believing that he had influenced fate, that is what could shape the future. But now he saw that the future was an ever-evolving path, guided by forces beyond even the gods. Odin had sacrificed much in his quest for knowledge, his eye, his time, and even his sense of self, and now he found himself grappling with the consequences of that pursuit. He had sought wisdom to gain greater control over his destiny, to unlock the secrets of the universe and see beyond the veils of time. But in doing so, he had gained an understanding that was far more complex than he had ever anticipated. The universe was not something that could be understood simply, nor was it something that could be bent to a single god's will. In the end, all beings, mortal and divine, were bound to the cyclical flow of existence, caught in the tides of life, death, and rebirth that swept through the realms. The knowledge that had once seemed like a grand prize now felt like a heavy burden. For Odin, the cost of wisdom had been greater than he had imagined. In exchange for understanding the nature of the universe, he had lost the illusion of control. And yet, as painful as this realization was, there was also a strange kind of freedom in it. He no longer had to carry the weight of the universe on his shoulders. He no longer had to feel responsible for shaping the future of the gods and mortals. He could now see his place within the vast web of existence, as a part of something greater than himself. The burden of knowledge had also altered his perception of his role as the Allfather. The gods, it seemed, were not the masters of fate, but participants in it. They were bound by the same forces that governed all beings, and no amount of power or wisdom could change that. Odin understood now that his true purpose was not to dictate the future, but to guide the realms and their inhabitants with the wisdom he had gained. He was not a king who ruled over the 9 realms. He was a protector, a shepherd of the cosmic balance. His role was to ensure that the realms did not fall into chaos, to keep the delicate balance between life and death intact. It was not about exercise and control, but about maintaining harmony. In his newfound understanding, Odin also saw the gods in a different light. He had always believed that they were superior to mortals, that their immortality and power made them above the frailties of human life. But now he understood that the gods, like mortals, were bound by fate. They had their own destinies, just as the humans did. They were not invincible. They were not immune to the forces that govern the universe. The immortality that they so cherished was not a gift that would last forever. In the end, even the gods would be swept away by the tides of time, their names and their deeds fading into legend. This truth was painful, but it was also liberating. It allowed Odin to see the gods as they truly were, beings with their own limitations, their own roles to play in the great cosmic order. As Odin pondered this new perspective, he began to feel a deep sense of compassion for the mortals of Midgard. For so long, he had viewed them as insignificant, their lives short and fleeting in comparison to the gods. He had observed them from afar, seeing them as little more than pawns in the grand game of fate. But now, with the wisdom he had gained, Odin saw the value in their lives. Their brief existence was not a curse, but a gift. Mortals experience life in its fullest form, each moment precious because of its impermanence. Their struggles, their joys, their triumphs and failures, these are the things that gave life meaning. In many ways, the mortals were wiser than the gods, for they understood the value of each moment in a way that Odin and the other gods could not. This newfound compassion for the mortals did not lessen Odin's sense of responsibility for them. If anything, it deepened his desire to protect them. He now saw the interconnectedness of all the realms, and he understood that the gods had a duty to the mortals, not as rulers, but as guardians. It was not about wielding power over them, but about guiding them, teaching them, and ensuring that they were able to live their lives in peace. The balance between the realms, the delicate harmony that kept the 9 realms intact, depended on the gods recognizing their place in the grand design. They were not the masters of the universe. They were stewards of it, protectors of its delicate balance. Odin's perception of his fellow gods also shifted. He had often seen them as tools to be used in the pursuit of power, knowledge, and influence. But now, he saw them as fellow beings, each with their own destinies to fulfill. They, too, were bound by fate just as he was. Some gods would rise, while others would fall. Some would endure, while others would fade into history. This understanding did not make Odin feel less powerful. It made him feel more connected. He was no longer the sole ruler of the gods. He was one part of a greater whole. And in this greater whole, each god had a role to play, each one contributing to the cosmic balance in their own unique way. This shift in perspective was profound. Odin had once believed that his power and wisdom set him apart from the other gods. He had thought that his sacrifice for knowledge made him superior, that his decisions were more important, his actions more consequential. But now, he saw that the true power lay not in domination, but in cooperation. The gods, like all beings, were part of a larger system, a system that worked best when they worked together. The arrogance that had once defined Odin's leadership was now replaced with humility, a humility born of the understanding that no one, not even the gods, could stand alone. The gods were part of the same universe as mortals, and they too were subject to the same forces of fate and time. As he reflected on these realizations, Odin also found a new understanding of the concept of sacrifice. He had always believed that sacrifice was the price of knowledge and power, that to gain something, one had to give something up. But now, with the wisdom of the well coursing through him, he saw sacrifice in a different light. Sacrifice was not just about giving up something of value in exchange for something greater. It was about recognizing the interconnectedness of all things, understanding that one's actions affected the whole. When one being sacrificed for another, it was not just a personal loss. It was an act that rippled through the realms, creating change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Sacrifice, in this sense, was not just a tool for achieving a goal. It was a way of participating in the great flow of existence, contributing to the balance that held the worlds together. The wisdom Odin had gained did not just change the way he saw the gods and mortals. It changed the way he saw the very nature of existence. The 9 realms were not isolated from one another. They were all interconnected, woven together by the forces of fate and time. The gods, the mortals, the creatures that inhabited the worlds, they were all part of the same great tapestry. And in this interconnectedness, Odin found a new sense of purpose. He was not just a god of war, wisdom, and knowledge. He was a part of something much greater, something that transcended individual desires and ambitions. The wisdom he had sought had shown him the true nature of the universe, and in this truth he had found his place. His role was not to rule, but to guide, to protect, and to ensure that the balance of the realms was maintained. In this new understanding, Odin found peace. The burden of wisdom was no longer a heavy weight that threatened to crush him. It was a gift that allowed him to see the world as it truly was, a gift that gave him the clarity to accept his place in the grand design of existence. He was no longer the all-powerful god who controlled the fates of gods and mortals. He was a part of the cosmic flow, a participant in the eternal dance. The more Odin pondered the vastness of the wisdom he had gained from the Well of Wisdom, the more he realized how little he had truly understood before. The universe, in all its intricate complexity, could not be governed by sheer will alone. It was not a kingdom that could be ruled by power or knowledge, but a living, breathing entity that thrived on the balance between creation and destruction, order and chaos. Every action, no matter how small, had consequences that rippled across the 9 realms, altering the course of time and fate. The gods, despite their immortality, were not above this flow. They, too, were bound to the cosmic dance, subject to the same forces that shaped the mortal realms. This was not the simple truth Odin had sought. It was a much deeper, more profound understanding of existence itself. The realization weighed heavily on Odin. He had always prided himself on his pursuit of wisdom, his ability to see beyond the veils of time and space. But now, with the knowledge of the Well of Wisdom coursing through him, he understood that wisdom was not about acquiring power or control. It was about understanding the limitations of one's own perspective and the ever-changing nature of the world. The universe was not static, and neither were the gods. The realms were in constant flux, and no being, no matter how powerful, could truly hold dominion over them for eternity. Odin had spent countless years seeking knowledge, sacrificing part of himself for the sake of deeper understanding. His sacrifice had been great, his eye, his time, and ultimately his sense of self. But now, in the face of this newfound wisdom, he saw that his sacrifices had not been for the purpose of gaining control. They had been for the purpose of realizing the true nature of existence. Knowledge, Odin now knew, was not a weapon to be wielded. It was a force that shaped the very fabric of reality, a force that could only be understood through acceptance and humility. As the Allfather, Odin had always believed that the gods were superior to mortals, that their immortality and divine power set them apart from the fleeting lives of humans. He had seen himself as the ultimate ruler of the realms, the one who stood above all others. But the wisdom he had gained had shown him that this view was flawed. The gods, in their immortality, were not exempt from the forces of fate and time. They, too, were subject to the cyclical nature of existence, bound to the rhythms of life and death, creation and destruction. The gods were not eternal in the way they had once believed. They were, in their own way, bound to the same cycles that govern all life. The truth of this realization was both sobering and liberating. Odin now saw that the gods were not invincible. They were not above death or decay. They were not immune to the forces that shaped the universe. And this was not something to be feared. It was simply the way of the world. The gods, just like mortals, had their roles to play in the great cosmic order, and they were not exempt from the inevitability of change. The power they wielded, the wisdom they had accumulated, it was all part of the natural flow of existence. They were not masters of fate, but participants in it. Odin had long sought to control his destiny, to bend the threads of fate to his will. But now, with the wisdom he had gained, he understood that fate was not something that could be controlled. It was a force beyond even the gods, something that could be influenced but never fully dictated. The Norns, the weavers of fate, had always guided the threads of existence, but even they were subject to the ebb and flow of the universe. No matter how much wisdom Odin gained, no matter how much power he amassed. He could not escape the cycles of creation and destruction that shaped all things. This understanding did not diminish Odin's sense of responsibility, but it did change the way he saw his role in the world. He no longer saw himself as the ruler of the 9 realms, the one who controlled the fate of gods and mortals. He saw himself as a steward, a guardian of the cosmic balance. His role was not to bend the universe to his will, but to ensure that it remained in harmony, that the forces of creation and destruction were balanced, that the realms did not fall into chaos. He was not a god who commanded the universe. He was a participant in it, a part of the great web of existence. The realization that the gods were not above fate, that even they were bound by the natural laws of the universe, was a humbling one. Odin had always seen himself as superior to mortals, as a being who transcended the limitations of human life. But now, with the wisdom of the Well, he saw that the gods were not exempt from the very forces that govern the lives of mortals. The gods were not eternal in the way they had once believed. They, too, were part of the great cycle of existence, and their immortality was not a shield from the ravages of time. The immortality of the gods, like the fleeting lives of mortals, was temporary. They would one day fall, just as the mortals did. This knowledge brought with it a deep sense of sorrow. The gods, for all their power and wisdom, were not exempt from the inevitable decay of all things. Their immortality was not a guarantee of eternal life. It was simply a pause in the great cycle of time. The gods, like all beings, would one day be swept away by the forces that govern existence. This was the price of wisdom. This was the burden of knowledge. And yet, in this understanding, Odin found a strange kind of peace. He no longer had to carry the weight of the universe on his shoulders. He no longer had to fear the inevitable end. The universe, in all its complexity, was not something to be controlled or feared. It was something to be understood and accepted. Odin's new perspective also deepened his understanding of the mortals of Midgard. He had always viewed them as fleeting, insignificant creatures, bound by the limitations of their short lives. He had seen them as tools to be used in the grand design of the gods, but he had never truly understood them. Now, with the wisdom of the Well, Odin saw the value in their lives. Mortals, for all their flaws and imperfections, had something that the gods did not: the ability to experience life in its fullest form. Their brief existence, their struggles, their triumphs, and their failures, all of these things made their lives meaningful. Mortals understood the value of each moment because they knew that it was fleeting. They lived with a sense of urgency that the gods could not comprehend. In many ways, the mortals were wiser than the gods, for they saw life through a lens of impermanence. They understood that their time was limited, and so they lived each moment as though it were their last. This newfound understanding of mortality gave Odin a sense of compassion for the mortals. He no longer saw them as pawns in a game of fate, but as fellow participants in the great cosmic order. Their lives, though brief, were filled with meaning. They were part of the tapestry of existence, just as the gods were. And in this realization, Odin felt a deep sense of responsibility to protect them. He understood that the balance of the realms depended not just on the gods, but on the mortals as well. They, too, had a role to play in the grand design. They, too, were part of the flow of creation and destruction that shaped the universe. Odin's role as the Allfather was now clearer to him than ever before. He was not meant to be a tyrant, a ruler who bent the universe to his will. He was meant to be a protector, a guardian of the balance between life and death. The gods were not meant to rule over the mortals, but to guide them, to help them navigate the complexities of life. The true strength of the gods lay not in their power, but in their ability to work in harmony with the universe, to understand their place in the great web of existence. The gods were not separate from the mortals. They were part of the same cosmic dance, and their fates were intertwined. As Odin reflected on these truths, he began to see his own immortality in a new light. It was not a gift to be wielded like a weapon. It was a responsibility. The gods were not immortal because they were superior to the mortals, but because they had a role to play in the grand design. Their immortality was not an escape from the cycles of life and death. It was a means of ensuring that the balance of the realms was maintained. The gods, like the mortals, were bound to the flow of time. They were not above it. They were part of it. In this understanding, Odin found a sense of peace. He no longer had to fear the passage of time. He no longer had to fear the end of the gods. The knowledge he had gained had freed him from the illusion of control. He understood now that the universe was not something to be mastered. It was something to be accepted. The gods were not rulers of the universe. They were stewards of it, protectors of the cosmic balance. And in this realization, Odin found a new sense of purpose. His role was not to dominate the realms, but to ensure that the balance between life and death, creation and destruction, was maintained. He was no longer the Allfather who controlled the fates of gods and mortals. He was a part of the greater whole, a participant in the eternal cycle of existence. And in this understanding, he found peace. The weight of wisdom that Odin now carried was not just intellectual, it was existential. He had sacrificed his I, his sense of self, and his time, all to uncover the secrets of the cosmos. But what had he really gained? More than knowledge, more than power, he had found himself faced with profound realization that all the gods, all beings in the 9 realms, were part of a larger, unfathomable design. The complexities of existence were not meant to be understood by one being alone, even one as mighty as Odin. The universe, it seemed, was not a place to be controlled or shaped. It was an intricate web of forces, each pulling in different directions, each influencing the others in subtle and profound ways. The threads of fate, woven by the Norns, were neither predictable nor absolute. They were not bound by the will of any single god, not even the Allfather himself. Odin's understanding of time had shifted drastically. The concept of linear time, which he had once viewed as an unchanging, measurable entity, had dissolved into something much more fluid, more intangible. Past, present, and future were not fixed points on a timeline, but interconnected realities, constantly shifting, blending, and evolving. Time was not a thing to be conquered. It was a current to be navigated. In this new vision, Odin found himself humbled. He had spent so long believing that his actions could influence the very course of history, that the future was something he could bend to his will. But the truth, as revealed to him by the Well of Wisdom, was far more complex. History was not a straight line, and even the gods could not steer in one direction. The forces of destiny, of fate, were too vast, too intertwined with the actions of all beings across all realms to be controlled by any one entity. In this newfound understanding, Odin was forced to confront his own limitations. He had long believed that wisdom and power could be wielded as tools to shape the world around him, to protect his people and guide his fellow gods. But the wisdom he had acquired had shown him the futility of such ambitions. The gods, for all their might, were not exempt from the forces that shaped the universe. They were bound by the same rules, the same flows of time and fate, as every other living being in the 9 realms. Even Odin, the god of wisdom and knowledge, was subject to the cycles of creation and destruction that govern the very fabric of existence. This realization was both sobering and liberating. On the one hand, it brought with it a deep sense of loss. Odin had spent so much of his existence trying to master the realms, to bend the forces of the universe to his will. But now, he saw that true wisdom was not about mastery or control. It was about understanding the limits of one's influence and accepting the role one played in the greater design of existence. Wisdom was not a tool to shape the world. It was a lens through which to see the world as it truly was, a constantly shifting, ever-evolving network of interdependent forces. On the other hand, this understanding brought Odin a sense of peace, a peace born of acceptance. He no longer had to carry the burden of trying to control the world. His role was not to shape the future, but to navigate it, to act with wisdom and compassion within the ever-changing currents of time. He understood now that his duty as the Allfather was not to dictate the fate of the realms, but to guide them, to ensure that the balance of creation and destruction was maintained. The gods, like all beings, had their place within this great design, and it was not their place to dominate it. Rather, their role was to serve, to ensure the cosmic order remained intact. Odin's newfound perspective also altered his relationship with the other gods. In the past, he had viewed himself as their leader, the one who stood above them, guiding their actions and ensuring that they fulfilled their roles within the 9 realms. But now, he understood that the gods were not his subordinates. They were not pawns to be moved around the chessboard of existence. The gods, like all beings, were part of the greater whole. They had their own destinies, their own roles to play, and they were bound to the same forces that govern the lives of mortals. Odin saw that, despite his position as the Allfather, he was no different from the other gods. His wisdom and power were not his alone. They were part of a larger, interconnected web of existence, a web that could not be unraveled by any one god, no matter how powerful. This understanding of the gods as equals in the grand design gave Odin a new sense of humility. The gods, despite their immortality and their immense power, were not exempt from the forces of fate. They, too, were subject to the cycles of time and change. Their immortality was not an escape from death or decay. It was simply a temporary state within the greater cycle of existence. The gods would fall just as mortals did. They would rise, and they would perish. This understanding of mortality, of the inevitable passage of time, was something Odin had never fully accepted before. But now, with the wisdom of the Well, he understood that immortality was not a guarantee of eternity. It was merely a phase in the endless cycle of life and death. The gods, like the mortals, were bound to the same laws of existence. This realization brought with it a profound sense of grief. The gods, in their desire for power and control, had long believed that they were above the mortal realm, that their immortality and wisdom set them apart from the fleeting lives of humans. But now, Odin saw the truth, that the gods were not above the cycles of life and death. They were part of them. This truth was both painful and liberating. It was painful because it shattered the illusion of godhood, the idea that the gods were eternal, unchanging beings who stood apart from the rest of the universe. But it was liberating because it meant that the gods could no longer be seen as the ultimate rulers of the 9 realms. They were simply participants in the greater dance of existence, their roles as important as any mortals. This newfound understanding made Odin realize that his role as the Allfather was not to dominate the gods, but to help them see their place within the cosmic order. With this understanding, Odin found himself looking at the mortals of Midgard in a new light. For so long, he had viewed them as insignificant, their lives short and fleeting in comparison to the gods. They had been mere tools in the grand game of fate, pawns to be moved at the whim of the gods. But now, with the wisdom of the Well, Odin saw the value in their lives. The mortals, despite their fleeting existence, had something the gods lacked: the ability to experience life in its fullest form. Their mortality gave their lives a sense of urgency, a sense of meaning that the gods could not fully comprehend. The gods, in their immortality, had lost the ability to appreciate the fleeting beauty of life, the intensity of each moment. The mortals lived with a kind of clarity that the gods, burdened with eternity, could not understand. This realization brought with it a deep sense of compassion for the mortals. Their lives, though brief, were filled with meaning. Each moment was precious because it was finite. The gods, in their eternity, had lost the appreciation for life that the mortals held. The fleeting nature of their existence made every moment precious, every choice meaningful. The gods, with their endless lives, could not fully understand this. And yet, in many ways, the mortals were wiser than the gods, for they lived with a sense of purpose that was informed by the awareness of their own mortality. They were not bound by the cycles of eternity. They were bound by the present moment, by the urgency of their existence. This understanding of mortality and meaning gave Odin a new sense of purpose. His role as the Allfather was no longer about dominating the 9 realms or controlling the fate of the gods. It was about guiding the realms, ensuring that the balance between creation and destruction was maintained. His wisdom was not a weapon to be wielded, but a tool for understanding the interconnectedness of all things. The gods, the mortals, the creatures of the realms, they were all part of the same great cosmic design. And it was Odin's role to ensure that this design remained intact, that the balance between life and death, creation and destruction, remained undisturbed. As Odin reflected on these realizations, he found a new sense of peace. The wisdom he had gained was not the power to control the universe. It was a power to understand it, to accept his place within it. He no longer had to fear the passage of time, the fall of the gods, or the eventual decay of all things. He understood now that these were natural parts of existence, inevitable forces that could not be avoided. The gods, like all beings, were part of the eternal cycle. And in this acceptance, Odin found his true strength, not in domination, but in humility, in understanding, and in the acceptance of his role in the grand design. The wisdom he had sought had not given him the power to change the world. It had given him the power to accept it as it was, and to live in harmony with it. The wisdom Odin had gained was not the kind of knowledge that simply filled the mind. It penetrated the very core of his being. It did not just teach him facts or open his eyes to the hidden truths of the universe. It reshaped his perception of existence itself. He had entered the well of wisdom seeking understanding, power, and insight. Yet, as he emerged from its depths, he found that what he had gained was not just a deeper knowledge of the realms, but a profound shift in his understanding of what it meant to exist at all. Odin had long prided himself on his quest for wisdom, convinced that knowledge was the key to controlling his destiny. He had believed that if he could understand the forces that govern the universe, time, fate, death, and life itself, he would be able to shape the world in his image. But the wisdom he had acquired had shown him that the world, in all its complexity, could not be shaped or controlled by any one god. The gods themselves were part of a greater system, caught in the ever-turning wheel of fate, just as mortals were. Their powers, their immortality, and their wisdom did not exempt them from the laws of the universe. In the face of this revelation, Odin was forced to confront the truth. His role was not to dominate the world, but to understand it, to guide it with the wisdom he had acquired, and to accept his place within the vast and ever-changing tapestry of existence. This understanding was both humbling and liberating. For so long, Odin had seen himself as a god who stood above the world, a being who could shape the future with his will. But now, with the wisdom of the well flowing through his veins, he saw the fragility of his existence, the interconnectedness of all things, and the futility of trying to control the uncontrollable. The gods, despite their immortality, were not separate from the rest of existence. They were part of it. They were not invincible or all-powerful. They, too, were bound by the same forces that governed all beings, and their actions, no matter how great or small, had consequences that rippled through the realms. This revelation caused Odin to reflect on his actions throughout the ages. He had fought countless battles, made countless sacrifices, and altered the course of history, all in the name of power, protection, and knowledge. He had sacrificed an eye to gain wisdom, a piece of himself for the sake of understanding the mysteries of the cosmos. But now, with the knowledge he had gained, he realized that his pursuit of power had often been misguided. He had been so focused on controlling fate, on bending the world to his will, that he had forgotten the importance of balance, of harmony. Power alone could not protect the realms. Wisdom, humility, and understanding were the true keys to maintaining the cosmic order. The realization that the gods were not above fate, that they were not immune to the forces of time, was a painful one for Odin to accept. For so long, he had believed that the gods were eternal, that their immortality set them apart from the mortals they ruled. But now, he understood that immortality was not a gift, but a burden. The gods, like all beings, were subject to the same cycles of creation and destruction, of life and death, that governed the rest of the realms. Even the gods would eventually fall. Even their names and deeds would fade into legend, replaced by the next cycle of creation. There was no escaping the flow of time, no matter how powerful or wise one might be. This truth was a sobering one. Odin had always believed that the gods, with their wisdom and power, were above the forces that governed the universe. But now he saw that they, too, were part of the same cosmic dance. They were not invulnerable. They were not eternal. They were part of a larger system that transcended even their understanding. And in this realization, Odin found a deep sense of humility. He was no longer the Allfather who ruled over the gods and mortals. He was a participant in the great cycle of existence, a small part of a much greater whole. His immortality, like that of the gods, was not an escape from death. It was simply a phase in the endless cycle of creation and destruction. The knowledge Odin had gained also deepened his understanding of the role of the Norns, the weavers of fate. He had long believed that the Norns were the ones who controlled the threads of destiny. But now he understood that they, too, were bound by the forces that shaped the universe. The Norns were not omnipotent. They were simply part of the greater flow of time. They wove the threads of life and death, but they did not control them. The threads of fate were not rigid and unchanging. They were flexible, fluid, and constantly shifting. Even the Norns, with all their knowledge and power, could not see the entire tapestry of existence. They, too, were part of the same system, subject to the same cycles of creation and destruction. This understanding of the Norns and their role in the grand design was a crucial one for Odin. It allowed him to see his own role in a new light. He was not the master of fate. He was not the one who controlled the future. He was a part of the web of existence, a participant in the flow of time. His actions had consequences, but those consequences were not always within his control. The future was not something that could be predicted or shaped by any one being. It was a constantly evolving series of events, influenced by countless factors, many of which were beyond even the gods' understanding. This realization brought with it a sense of peace. Odin had spent so long believing that his wisdom and power could shape the future. But now, he understood that the future was not his to command. It was not about control. It was about understanding the forces that shape the universe and working within them. Wisdom was not about bending the world to one's will. It was about living in harmony with the universe, accepting one's place within the cosmic order, and working to maintain balance. As Odin reflected on these insights, he began to see his role as the Allfather in a new light. His job was not to dominate the realms or to control the destinies of the gods and mortals. It was to guide, to protect, and to ensure that the balance of the realms was maintained. The gods, like all beings, had their roles to play in the great cycle of existence, and it was Odin's responsibility to help them fulfill those roles, to help them see the larger picture. He was not above the gods. He was one part of a much larger whole, and his actions had consequences that extended far beyond his immediate reach. This understanding also deepened Odin's compassion for the mortals of Midgard. For so long he had seen them as fleeting, insignificant creatures, their lives short and meaningless in comparison to the gods. But now, he saw their lives as valuable, as part of the same cosmic design that governed the realms. Mortals, with their limited time and fragile existence, understood the beauty of life in a way that the gods could not. Their mortality gave their lives meaning. The gods, in their immortality, had lost the ability to appreciate the fleeting nature of existence. But the mortals, despite their fragility, lived with a sense of urgency, a sense of purpose that the gods could not fully comprehend. This newfound understanding of mortality deepened Odin's sense of responsibility. His role as the Allfather was not to control the lives of the mortals, but to guide them, to help them find their place within the greater design. The gods were not rulers of Midgard. They were guardians, protectors, and teachers. Their purpose was not to dominate, but to ensure that the balance between life and death was maintained. The mortals were not tools to be used in the gods' game of fate. They were fellow participants in the cosmic order, and their lives, though brief, were as meaningful as the lives of the gods. The more Odin reflected on the wisdom he had gained, the more he realized that the true power of the gods lay not in their immortality, but in their ability to understand the nature of the universe and their place within it. Wisdom was not about controlling the realms or shaping fate. It was about accepting the flow of time, understanding the interconnectedness of all things, and working to maintain the balance that held the realms together. The gods were not masters of fate. They were stewards of the cosmic order. Their immortality was not a shield from death. It was a responsibility to ensure that the balance of the realms was preserved. This understanding transformed Odin's view of his own existence. He was no longer the Allfather who ruled over the realms. He was a participant in the grand design, a being who, like all others, was subject to the forces that shaped the universe. His immortality was not a privilege. It was a duty. His role was not to dominate or control, but to guide, to protect, and to ensure that the balance of life and death was maintained. In this acceptance of his place in the universe, Odin found a deeper sense of peace and purpose. He no longer sought to control the world. He sought only to understand it and to live in harmony with it. His wisdom was no longer a weapon. It was a gift that allowed him to see the world as it truly was and to accept his role within it. Odin's understanding of wisdom had become something far more profound than mere knowledge. It was not simply an accumulation of facts or the unraveling of mysteries about the realms. His quest had started with a desire to gain mastery over the world, to hold dominion over fate and time, but what he had found was a revelation that reshaped his very essence. Wisdom was not a tool for gaining control, but an insight into profound interconnectedness of all things. It was a path of acceptance, a surrendering to the flow of the universe rather than an attempt to alter it. For centuries, Odin had stood at the helm of the gods, a leader in the truest sense, constantly making decisions that shaped the fate of the 9 realms. He had watched over his people and the gods with protective and calculating eye, believing that his role was to steer the realms toward a future of stability, order, and prosperity. His wisdom had been a gift, yes, but also a burden, a tool that he had wielded with the belief that his knowledge of the future and understanding of fate could guide the realms into a harmonious existence. But now, with the clarity that the Well of Wisdom had granted him, Odin found that the very nature of wisdom was not about shaping the future or controlling what was to come. It was about understanding the inevitability of fate, the fleetingness of life, and the importance of living within the confines of those truths. The universe, in its infinite complexity, could not be understood by simply looking at it through the lens of a single being. Every action, every decision, rippled out into the vast web of existence, creating consequences that extended far beyond Odin's understanding, beyond the 9 realms. He could influence the course of events, yes, but he could not control them. The gods were not exempt from the forces that shaped the world. They were part of it. Even their immortality was not immunity from the laws of fate. Odin had always believed that his wisdom had made him superior, that his sacrifice and his deep understanding of the cosmos set him apart from mortals and gods alike. But now, he understood that wisdom, true wisdom, was not about elevating oneself above others. It was about recognizing one's place within the grand order of things, understanding that no one, not even the gods, could transcend the forces that govern the universe. The understanding of fate, of how the threads of destiny wove the lives of all beings, was both an enlightening and humbling revelation for Odin. The Norns, the weavers of fate, were not all-powerful. They did not dictate every action, every decision, but rather guided the course of events in a way that ensured the natural flow of life and death. The threads they wove were intricate, fragile, and constantly shifting. Even they were subject to the forces of the cosmos, forces that no god, not even Odin, could fully comprehend or control. Odin had spent so many years trying to master fate, to twist the threads of destiny to his own will. But now, he saw that the Norns were simply participants in a much greater design, guiding the flow rather than controlling it. He, too, was a participant, a small part of a greater whole. The acceptance of this truth, that no one could fully control fate, was a turning point for Odin. It was as though the burden he had carried for so long, the weight of ruling the gods and guiding the 9 realms, had been lifted. He had spent so many years fearing the unpredictability of the future, trying to read the signs, to anticipate the coming of Ragnarok, and to find ways to prevent it. But now, he saw that Ragnarok was not something to be feared or avoided. It was an inevitable part of the cosmic cycle. It was a part of life, of the ever-turning wheel of creation and destruction. No matter how powerful or wise the gods were, they could not escape it. All things must come to an end, and in that end, there was rebirth, a new beginning. The wisdom Odin had gained had not given him the power to avoid the inevitable. It had given him the wisdom to accept it. In this acceptance, Odin found a deeper peace. For so long, he had believed that his wisdom and power were his greatest assets, that they gave him control over the fate of the realms. But now, he realized that it was not his power that defined him. It was his ability to accept the ebb and flow of time, to live in harmony with the universe rather than against it. The future, with all its uncertainties and potential for chaos, was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. It was part of the great cycle, part of the ever-turning wheel of existence that kept the realms in balance. Odin's relationship with the other gods shifted as well. He had once seen himself as a supreme ruler, the Allfather, the one who was responsible for guiding the gods and ensuring that the realms remained in harmony. He had set himself apart from the others, believing that his wisdom and his sacrifices made him different, more powerful, more capable of handling the weight of the realms. But now, with the wisdom of the well coursing through him, he understood that the gods were not his subordinates. They were not tools for him to use in his quest for power or control. They were equal participants in the great dance of existence, each with their own role to play in the grand design of the universe. Their wisdom, their power, their immortality, these were not things to be wielded for personal gain. They were part of the greater whole, and Odin's role was not to command them, but to guide them, to help them see their place within the vast and interconnected system that held the realms together. This shift in perspective deepened Odin's compassion for the gods. He had long seen them as his allies, his equals in power and wisdom, but also as beings to be ruled, to be guided in the right direction. Now, he understood that the gods, like all beings, were subject to the same laws of fate and time. They, too, were part of the cosmic flow, and their actions, no matter how great or small, had consequences that rippled through the realms. No one was exempt from the cycles of life and death. Even the gods, in their immortality, were not free from the natural order of things. Their role was not to dominate, but to maintain the balance, to protect the realms from chaos. Each god had a unique purpose, a role to play in the grand design, and it was Odin's responsibility to help them understand that role, to help them fulfill their part in the cosmic order. The more Odin reflected on this truth, the more he realized that his greatest strength was not in his wisdom, his power, or his immortality. It was in his ability to guide, to protect, and to nurture the balance of the realms. His wisdom had not made him a ruler. It had made him a steward, a caretaker of the cosmic order. He was not the master of fate. He was a participant in it, just as the gods and mortals were. His role was to ensure that the delicate balance between life and death, creation and destruction, remained intact. He was not meant to bend the universe to his will. He was meant to help guide it along its natural course, to help the realms grow and evolve in harmony with the cosmic cycle. This understanding did not diminish Odin's sense of responsibility. It deepened it. He had always seen the gods as protectors of the realms, but now he understood that they were also participants in grand design, and their role was to maintain the balance of the realms rather than to control them. The gods were not meant to act as rulers over mortals. They were meant to guide them, to help them find their place within the vast system of existence. The wisdom Odin had gained was not a weapon for domination. It was a gift for understanding, for seeing the world as it truly was, and for living in harmony with it. In the end, Odin's quest for wisdom had not been about gaining power or control. It had been about understanding the nature of the universe, accepting the inevitability of fate, and recognizing his place within the great cosmic order. The wisdom he had sought had not given him the power to bend the world to his will. It had given him the power to accept the flow of time, to see the interconnectedness of all things, and to live in harmony with the universe. The great cycle of life and death, creation and destruction would continue, and Odin's role was not to fight it, but to protect it, to guide it, and to ensure that the realms remained in balance. As he reflected on all that he had learned, Odin felt a profound sense of peace. The burden of his wisdom was not the weight of knowledge. It was the weight of acceptance. Wisdom was not about controlling the universe. It was about understanding it. It was about seeing the vast interconnectedness of all things and recognizing that no one, not even the gods, could control the flow of fate. The wisdom Odin had gained had freed him from the illusion of control. He was no longer the master of the 9 realms. He was a participant in the grand design, a small part of the great cycle of existence, and in that, he found his true peace. Odin stood on the precipice of understanding, his heart heavy yet filled with an odd sense of peace. The vast expanse of wisdom he had gained had not been a straightforward answer to his questions, but a series of revelations, each one pulling back the veils of his understanding, one layer at a time. What had seemed like a simple quest for knowledge had transformed into an immersion in the eternal cycle of existence itself. With every drop of wisdom he drank from the well, it became clearer to Odin that the path to true enlightenment was not one of unyielding control, but profound acceptance. His thirst for power had once driven him to sacrifice everything, his eye, his time, his very identity. He had sought to control fate, to peer beyond the boundaries of the mortal world, and see the threads that wove together the destiny of gods and men. In his pursuit, he had delved into the deepest mysteries of the cosmos, hoping that with every new layer of understanding, he could grasp a greater hold over his future, over the course of history itself. But now, with the full weight of that knowledge upon him, he saw the futility in it. True wisdom was not about mastering fate. It was about recognizing its unstoppable flow. No being, whether mortal or divine, could bend it to their will forever. Fate was not a rope to be pulled or a chain to be forged. It was a river that carried all things, a current that moved through the 9 realms, through all beings, regardless of their desires or intentions. Odin's quest had been one of pride, one of desperation to assert his own power over the universe, to stand apart from the mortals and the gods alike, as a figure who controlled the flow of time itself. He had always believed that his sacrifices would bring him the power to command the forces of nature, to avert the great disaster of Ragnarok, and alter the destiny of the 9 realms. But as the wisdom of the well seeped into his bones, he came to understand that no matter how much wisdom or power one attained, no one could stop the natural cycles of the universe. Time, fate, life, death, they were all intertwined in a dance that could not be unraveled or changed by the desires of a single being. This realization forced Odin to reevaluate his relationship with not only the gods, but the mortals of Midgard as well. For so long he had seen the gods as the rulers of the 9 realms, superior beings whose purpose was to guide and protect the mortals. He had viewed the gods' immortality and their wisdom as marks of their divine superiority. But now, he saw that the immortality of the gods did not separate them from the rest of existence. They were part of the great cosmic dance, just like every other being, subject to the same forces that govern the lives of mortals. The gods were not above fate. They, too, were bound by it, and their immortal lives were but temporary pauses in the grand cycle of life and death. This revelation brought with it a profound sense of humility. Odin had spent countless centuries striving to be the supreme ruler, the eternal God who stood above all others, bending the 9 realms to his will. But now, with the wisdom he had gained, he saw that the gods were not masters of the universe. They were stewards, guardians of the delicate balance between creation and destruction, between life and death. Their immortality was not a sign of superiority, but a responsibility. They were caretakers of the cycle, entrusted with maintaining harmony in a world that was constantly shifting, evolving, and changing. Even the gods had their limits. Even they were bound by forces beyond their comprehension. This was perhaps the greatest revelation Odin had experienced. The universe, in its infinite complexity, was not a system that could be controlled or dominated. It was a force to be respected, to be understood, but not one that could be mastered. The gods could not control the fate of the 9 realms. They could only guide it, nurture it, and protect it. They were not above the forces of nature, but participants in it. Their wisdom was not a tool for domination, but a means of understanding the flow of existence, of navigating the currents of fate, and of ensuring that the realms remain balanced. This understanding brought Odin a kind of peace, for it freed him from the burden of trying to control everything. The weight of responsibility that had long pressed on his shoulders seemed to lighten, and for the first time in centuries, he felt a deep sense of release. The gods, despite their power, were not meant to wield control over the 9 realms. Their purpose was to guide and protect, to help maintain the natural balance between all things. They were not above the realms. They were a part of them. Each realm had its own role to play in the greater cosmic order, and the gods were not exempt from that order. They, too, had their place within it. Odin had always seen himself as the architect of destiny, the one who would shape the future of the gods and mortals alike. But now, he realized that he was simply a participant in that greater design. He was not a ruler of the 9 realms. He was a part of them, an equal player in the game of fate. This newfound understanding also shifted his perspective on the mortals of Midgard. In the past, Odin had often viewed them as fragile, fleeting creatures who existed only to serve the gods. He had seen them as pawns in the great game of fate, their lives short and inconsequential compared to the gods' eternal existence. But now, with the wisdom of the well flooding his mind, he understood that the mortals, despite their fleeting lives, had a wisdom that the gods could not fully comprehend. They lived with urgency, with purpose, because they knew their time was limited. Their lives, though brief, were filled with meaning because they were not burdened with the eternity of the gods. The gods had lost the ability to fully appreciate the beauty of life because they had no sense of urgency. They could afford to wait, to contemplate, to take their time. But the mortals, in their short lives, understood the preciousness of every moment. They lived with a clarity that the gods had long since lost. This revelation gave Odin a deep sense of compassion for the mortals of Midgard. They were not insignificant creatures, not mere tools for the gods to manipulate. They were vital parts of the great cosmic web, and their lives, though brief, had meaning. The gods were not above them. They were part of the same system, connected to them in ways that Odin had never fully understood until now. The wisdom of the well had shown him that the mortals, in their mortality, had something that the gods lacked. They had the ability to live fully in the present moment, to experience the world in its most vivid, fleeting form. They understood the value of each moment because they knew it would not last forever. The gods, in their immortality, had lost that sense of urgency. They no longer saw each moment as a precious gift, as something to be cherished and lived to the fullest.